We've talked about the concept of demand, that consumers in a society determine the demand for a good or a service. We've talked about supply, how producers in a society determine production and determine the supply of something. Now we're going to put demand and supply together and create what we call a market. A market is putting demand and supply together to create this magic point we're going to call equilibrium. So, you know that all the consumers in society for a particular product could be represented by the demand curve. Price on the vertical axis, quantity on the horizontal axis, always. So we'll always put price on the vertical axis, we'll always put quantity on the horizontal axis. This downward sloping line, this demand curve, downward sloping down here in the dirt, labeled D down in the dirt, represents the demand of all the consumers for whatever good or service. Let's go to our cookies. So this is a cookie, what we're going to call a market, because now we're going to bring buyers and sellers together. The buyers represented by the demand curve and the sellers represented by the supply curve. So now we have buyers and sellers that have come together in one place, which we call a market. So whenever we say to draw a market from now on, in economics, this is what you're going to draw. You're not going to draw a picture of Tom Finger or 812 or whatever other store you might want to go to. You're going to draw this particular market. So we're going to say that wherever this quantity supplied equals quantity demanded, this point where wherever the price causes quantity supplied to equal quantity demanded, that's our magic point we call equilibrium, where all the stuff that is getting produced is also all the stuff that's getting bought. So therefore there's not too much stuff produced, not too little stuff produced, it's just right. So in economics, we call this the equilibrium point. The price is at equilibrium, the quantity is at equilibrium, because all the stuff that's getting bought is also getting, we say the market is imbalanced, just like Mr. Miyagi said. It's like the crane technique. Balance is the key. The crane technique, right? This is economics, equilibrium. The market is in balance. Now, could demand increase or decrease? Or supply increase or decrease? Absolutely. And if it does that, we can see that that would impact both the equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity in the market. And really it's pretty simplistic. If you increase demand, we want to know what's going to happen to price and quantity. So therefore, if demand increased, we're going to let this market tell the story. This was our equilibrium price, that's where we started. This was our equilibrium quantity where we started. So now we have a new equilibrium price, and we can see that that price is higher. We have a new equilibrium quantity. We can see that that equilibrium quantity is greater. So if demand increases, we can see that price increases and quantity increases. Well, what if something else changes? Let's say that maybe instead of increasing, maybe the demand decreased. Well, if demand decreased, so therefore we know less is left, so we decrease demand because left is less. Oh, we have a new equilibrium price, which is lower, and a new equilibrium quantity, which is less. So we know that price decreased, quantity decreased, because there was a decrease in demand. But what about supply? Same thing. If supply, not the same price and quantity change, but we could certainly change supply, as in we could increase supply or decrease supply. So, looking at the market again, let's say supply increased. And remember, right is more. So an increase in supply, we shift to the right. Oh, with an increase in supply, we now see that the price went down. With an increase in supply, we see that quantity increased. So, in this case, with an increase in supply, price decreased, quantity increased. What if supply decreases? What if supply decreases? We're going to see that remember, less is left, so we're going to shift supply to the left. supply shifts left. And so in that situation, we now see that price increased and quantity decreased. So price increased, quantity decreased. So this market will help us tell the story. This graph is your friend. If you're drawing the graph correctly, the graph can tell you the story. It can tell you what happens to price and quantity if there's a change in supply or change in demand. And this is the market.